I'm planning to spend my entire development career on this one project in order to make it the world's best single-player survival game.
I'm genuinely blown away by the last 3 months of effort from Antti.
Today we're going to be checking out a game that I've recently have been very, and I mean very, intrigued by.
Ever since he made the decision to move his game, he's actually doing it.
Many players don't really understand how hard video game development is. It requires so much work. It's ridiculous amount of work.
How long were you contemplating on that decision?
I was actually already testing alternatives if things turn even worse. I have not yet talked about this, but one faction is not going to be the bad guys, but they can be...
Hey, this is a bit... Oh my god, that's so good!
Some of the clues about the lore will actually, you need to find those in Finland.
It's a treasure hunt on steroids, this is. If we may divert our attention to the early access.
The early access version will definitely have more clues, and there's going to be one trader called Grandma. She will know a lot about things, but you have to kind of like pursue to get that information from her.
If you can, answer please do. If you can't, it's okay. What are the structures?
Yeah.
Road to Vostok is shaping up to be an extremely interesting game, and its developer, Antti, is truly showcasing his talent and dedication to the project. This is my second conversation with Antti, and I'm so excited for this episode. Last we spoke was a little over a year ago, back when the project was being developed on the Unity engine. Obviously, a lot has changed since then, when Antti has shocked the community by deciding to completely switch engines from Unity to Godot. We obviously talk about the transition and how everything played out during the Unity crisis, as well as the current state of the video game industry in general. Now, Antti's working hard on releasing Public Demo 2 version 2. We dive into that to see what we can expect when the demo finally releases. But most importantly, we talk about the significance of Public Demo 2 version 2, because this will be the final demo that we all get to play before the game hits early access. Now, there's a lot more things that we talk about in this episode. Obviously, we touch upon early access and its details. Antti actually mentions a new trader, which is very interesting. We talk about working with a music composer, and really interestingly, actually, we talk about the behind the scenes of being an indie game developer and running an indie game studio, and much, much more. And with that said, please enjoy the episode. Antti, thank you so much for coming back to the show. It's been just over a year since we last spoke, and I have to say, from the bottom of my heart, a big thank you to you for, in a way, kickstarting the channel, because to this day, our episode, or my debut episode, is the most popular episode, and it's all in part to you for sure. And I would just like to publicly say a big thank you for that. And today's, episode is sort of a year in review, if we could call it that, to see how things are going, because a year has passed and a lot has happened and the game has changed. And you have, well, to say it was a rough journey so far is to say nothing. So I'm here to speak about all of that. And kind of to start things off, how are you feeling? How's the game doing? And just generally, what is your kind of motivation currently with the game?
Yeah, thanks for having me for this round 2 interview. And personally, I'm feeling great. Just had a few weeks ago some first proper vacation since I became a full-time developer. It has been quite busy, so that was a nice thing. And when it comes to the project itself, that's going according to plans. Really excited about the next steps when this demo phase ends and the work towards the early access phase begins. So all good here.
That's good to hear. Really good to hear. And also, everyone has been following your devlogs, and in the devlogs, you can see that everything is going pretty good. But I want to kind of, if we're going to start with the main questions, kind of talk about the elephant in the room, which is, your transition from Unity to Godot. That was, a Herculean decision on your end, and a decision that was actually praised by everyone in the community through the various videos that you can see on YouTube from gamers, from developers and whatnot. And, obviously I praise that decision as well. Obviously you mentioned that you spent, I believe it was 11 years with Unity, whatever it was, that was the application that you, let's say, sculpted your career to work with. And then all of a sudden, we have this crazy thing that happened that forced you a little bit to change routes. So, with all that said, kind of to say that you're God tier developer is to say nothing. And my question would be, how long were you contemplating on that decision?
First, I have to say that I think I would not say it's the elephant in the room, because for me, game engines are basically just tools at the end of the day. The developer is the one who's kind of like making or breaking the project. But for me, when this kind of like Unity situation started, I think it took about 1 week maybe. And during that 1 week, I wasn't just kind of like depressed. I was actually already testing alternatives if things turn even worse.
I see.
Luckily, they didn't. But I did some tests. I tried Unreal, I tried Godot, and for me, the most important thing was that Road to Vostok is planned to be a career-long thing. I'm planning to spend my entire development career on this one project in order to make it the world's best single-player survival game. So I need to think about what would be the most secure engine and tool for me for the next 10 plus years. And since I have been playing around with lots of game development tools, I think the ones that have been the most secure and stable platforms have been open source tools. And even though the Godot is not that fancy, like visually, like Unreal, when I think it long terms, for example, how the open source 3D software Blender, how it evolved during each year. So I really think that the open source is the most suitable platform for this project, because I don't have kind of like the foresight to see what engines are going to be popular in plus 10 years. But I can say that I can now finish this entire game with even this Godot's version. So kind of like it's secured now. I don't have to worry about other things that are not in my control. So at the end of the day, I just wanted to make a decision. First, I needed to check that the engine is actually usable in terms of 3D and rendering performance, but then the kind of like security and stableness was kind of like the most important thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
But for your question, 1 week of spending kind of like thinking about it, not that maybe 2 weeks, 1 week, something along that lines.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I mean, first of all, it's great that you, I don't want to say made the decision specifically to make the decision, but that you kind of, were in a crossroads and you put your game, at the forefront and went for this decision, because I understand from what you were saying in the devlogs, it was, it's a tough thing. However, it started a bit earlier in the process, so you had the time to, actually, go for the transition. But my question would be, how difficult was it adapting the game to Godot? I mean, this is my limited knowledge of Godot speaking here, so don't judge me. From what I have seen from Godot prior to your transition is, great games, but nothing as graphically intense or probably as big as what you're making. Was the technology already there, or did you have to maybe reverse engineer some stuff, or maybe create, certain, things or code or whatever it is? So I'm quite interested in that as well.
Yeah, the most of the core 3D kind of like tool sets were there. I was actually planning that I'm probably going to need to develop myself lots of like engine specific tools, but luckily most of those existed already. Okay. I think the Godot had that capability a while now, but I think one of the kind of like key things, if I would kind of like be the marketing guru behind Godot, I would definitely hire some kind of like internal team to kind of like develop the best looking and most visually appealing kind of like showcase game for this engine. Because I think even Road to Vostok, this game in terms of graphical style is not that kind of like spectacular. So even like small group of students, kind of like some collaboration with some school with really talented students within, let's say, half a year, I think they could really push the Godot's kind of like visual appearance. Because I think there haven't just been so many kind of like serious 3D, kind of like at least in FPS genre games made with that engine. But that's not the engine's fault. That's, I think, just people had kind of like presumption that the engine might not be capable of doing that, even though it definitely can. I'm not saying Godot can do huge open worlds. That's going to need a lot of custom tech, but for a size like Road to Vostok, small limited maps, individual kind of like instances, semi-realistic graphics, no problem with that. But I'm happy that now I'm seeing more and more visually appealing games made with Godot. Just a few weeks ago there was one, I don't know the name, but it was something like PVVK, kind of like this cool, you control the massive cannon type of game, and that looked really awesome visually. So, like mentioned, when we go further and further, I'm expecting that Godot will evolve just like Blender did with 3D. So the community kind of like ramps up the development more. Each time when there's more visually appealing games made, that kind of like draws more people to the engine, and that again grows the community. So I see this healthy cycle with this open source platform that is really hard to kind of like ruin that cycle, because it's free. You can't really get greedy in terms of like who runs that engine and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with what you're saying. Hopefully maybe some representatives from Godot can listen to what you're saying and perhaps push their marketing team a bit more. But I was also going to add that also Brackeys came out of nowhere, after this whole Unity collapse, and everybody, started pushing into Godot. And even he says that this engine is great and it's fascinating. And so he kind of, let's say, restarted his YouTube career with, new tutorials for Godot. And I think that's a big sign to the success and to the, just the amazing software that Godot is. And I do agree with you that, with as the more time goes by, the better the engine's going to get. And I'm interested to see what other potential games are there to be created. But to this day, I mean, at least you are, let's say, spearheading this whole transition, which, we're all very excited for and thankful for. And to continue speaking kind of about all these large corporations, I kind of want to get your opinion on a few things. And, for the lack of a better term, they're all, it seems, are becoming greedier and greedier. Perhaps, maybe that's the right word, maybe not. But, we've obviously seen what the situation was with Unity. And now recently, Adobe has kind of sparked a lot of negativity with their new terms of use, which really affected me as well, because I'm more of a Adobe user. I've been using it for a long time. So what are your thoughts on that generally? And why do you think, all these companies are risking their reputations like that, from one day to another?
If you don't mind, I would like to kind of like mention a few things about the Unity thing that I want to highlight in this context. First of all, when we talk about big greedy corporations and collapsing and so on, so for me, I still think Unity is one of the most kind of like usable and beginner-friendly game engines out there. There's nothing wrong with the engine itself. I know personally a lot of people who are working with that engine. I have lots of colleagues who use that on daily basis. So even though I switched the engine, doesn't mean that I'm kind of like I have something against the Unity. I just made the decision that my situation was a bit different because I have to carry along decisions. But if anybody's listening to this, don't kind of like rule Unity out. That's awesome engine. There's awesome community still there. This was kind of like just a personal decision for me. But now going back to this big companies.
To the question. Yeah.
So first, I think one thing that is really good to understand that most terms of services nowadays, what tool, if you look really closely at the terms of service, everybody has so-called bad stuff there. It's kind of like naive to think that there's some kind of like only the big guys do the bad things. There's really, if you're worried about, for example, your personal information, I think we are kind of like lost that fight already, because everybody's gathering that. And if you want to use Google and every kind of like common social media nowadays, you kind of like already lost that privilege of being kind of like private and so on. But when it comes to AI and these new trends, I think it's kind of like inevitable that big companies are pursuing those new technologies because they don't want to get left behind. The methods that they are applying, that is kind of like, I don't think nobody really knows what that practically means if you kind of like give rights to kind of like analyze your content for AI. For example, Steam, if I have understand correctly, Steam have recently kind of like approved AI-made games for Steam, but what is an AI-made game? Because that's kind of like really blurred line, because we already have AI tools, but what's practically the AI? So we don't really know the context, what's happening behind the scenes. But I think it's just a matter of that big guys want to stay kind of like on the cutting edge of technology, whether it's kind of like these large language models, or there's so many avenues where you could kind of like go with the AI. So it's really hard to pinpoint what company uses what kind of specific techniques, because some AI tool can be really kind of like harmless, and some can be really kind of like intrusive and collect all the stuff. For example, that Adobe case, if I'm using Photoshop, I don't actually know how that thing works. Is it so intrusive? Is it just something like, I don't know. I don't have any idea. But like you mentioned, I have also kind of like, my fantasy would be that I have this game development toolset, which all are open source tools. Unfortunately, that's not quite there yet. It's pretty close, but for example, it's quite hard to replace some of the Photoshop things because I have custom plugins for that and so on. But I think the further we go and more kind of like news like this come out, I think that kind of like pushes the open source developers even more, because there's now a higher demand for tools that don't use your data so badly.
I see. Yeah, definitely. A lot of logic in what you're saying, and right. I agree with that. It's important to highlight, obviously, that the people working there, and the company itself or the software itself is not bad, obviously, and I can attest to that 100%. It's just whatever is happening, with the higher ups, that is sometimes a little bit problematic. But generally speaking, if we could just quickly talk about AI, because it's obviously something, it's a big trend now. Do you see it more of a positive or more of a negative thing? And when I talk about AI, what I mean is the current trend of generative fill, and the AI that creates photos and stuff like that, and the videos, Sora and whatnot. Because I know that there have been AI tools in the past that we have used, especially maybe game developers have used, but specifically with what's going on now today. What are your thoughts on that?
Personally, I would like to see that AI is implemented in those places that involves kind of like annoying work, because for example,
Gotcha.
I like making bunch of stuff that AI is trying to replace. So even though there was an AI tool, I kind of like did not resign my careers for I can just use AI and that does the work for me. So I think personally as a developer, I like doing some of the manual things. So I would like that AI is kind of like designed for topics that are the most annoying ones to the users. I haven't seen any polls from big companies, for example, Adobe. What's the most annoying manual thing that you do on daily basis? We could maybe figure out some AI use for that. So unfortunately, the AI implementation is kind of like determined on the company level, but not by the users level, what the users actually want to replace with AI. So as a developer, I don't want to use AI, even though in some places, because I like to do those tasks manually. I don't want that AI does some level stuff or designing or concept art, because I like that, and I'm happy to hire people for that because I like to process the communication and so on. But for game development, I think it's naive to say that AI is not going to affect this industry. I think it's not within few years. It will take more because games are so difficult. They need to run many times per second, and I haven't seen that kind of AI performance even close to that. AI is struggling. If you want AI, model me a AK-74 weapon. I haven't even seen an AI that can do a polished kind of like game-ready version of one single model. So I'm not a believer that we are going to see a full-scale, enjoyable, polished games made by AI pretty soon. But it's coming someday. Maybe first it's just kind of like as a tool, but AI will definitely impact the industry at some point. I think the first kind of like niches are going to be video, next kind of like more video-oriented AI tools and kind of like automated systems for YouTube and so on. But in terms of actual game development, I don't think AI is even close to that yet.
Got it.
Someday it will, but it's pretty far.
Okay, yeah, well, let's probably hope that it's a bit farther away. Again, I'm not sure where I stand with AI, really. That's why whenever I have these opportunities to speak to people on my podcast, I want to know their opinion. But mine, yeah, I like it and I don't like it at the same time. I like the creativity, but I don't like maybe some of the bad stuff. So we'll see. And hopefully, if it does touch the gaming industry in the future, as you said, let's hope that change is going to be a good change and not result in some kind of more layoffs and whatnot. Basically talking about the layoffs, I would really like to know your opinion on this as a game developer, as a person in the industry. I would like to kind of talk about the topic of today's situation within the gaming industry, with what's been going on. Because on the surface, it seems as though, for example, 2023 and 2024 were great years for games, be it indie games or AAA titles. We've had, really good games that came out, to my surprise, really, and to the surprise of many others. But yet, if we dig deeper, there have been, tons of layoffs, right? Only in 2023, around 10,000 people were laid off in the industry. 2024 is promising to be similar, if not worse. So what do you think is happening here? And why is there such a vast contrast of, good games being released and then all of a sudden all these layoffs?
I think there's so many kind of like aspects why this is happening. I think there's three ones that I recognize. I think the first one that's pretty obvious, and I've seen even people who are close to me, I've seen kind of like there's slowly becoming a new generation of gamers. I have this one story, which sounds like a common story, but I've actually seen this myself. I was on one gaming convention, Game Expo, and there was this kind of like young, I would say, under 10 boy who went to this kind of like playtest table. There was kind of like this PC and mouse and keyboard there and monitor. There was a joystick, meaning a PlayStation controller and a monitor. Okay. The first thing when the kid came to the table, it looked at the kind of like the joystick, the controller, put it away, and then tried to swipe the monitor, which is not a touch screen. And when I look at that, if you kind of like mean what that behavior indicates, we have now this generation that has kind of like raised with smartphone gaming.
Right.
To there, even the controller is kind of like a weird thing. I don't know the exact age of this boy. He might be 8, 6, I don't know, but he was young to me, and kind of like his natural instinct was to kind of like swipe the monitor, which is not a touchscreen device.
Got it.
And when we have this new generation of gamers, I think there's kind of like the demands for producing games, maybe for those people. I think the current players in the industry have it's a big shift for everyone. It's not affect everybody yet, but I think some studios definitely feel that there's certain group of gamers that are getting older, and there's this new generation. I think that's one piece of this puzzle. And then probably the most important one is that modern games, especially if you're trying to make AAA games, are really expensive. I mean, ridiculously expensive. And I think this is one reason why this is because everybody wants kind of like the most shiniest, coolest photorealistic game. People strive for the next gen experience. And for me, for a developer, that's kind of sad, because I have never enjoyed or truly kind of like invested myself to game just for the visuals. This gameplay is the most important stuff, but people nowadays really strive for the visuals and the kind of like the cool new gen, all the Unreal stuff and so on. But if you're trying to kind of like put that, even though the tools are getting better and better, Unreal has this all kinds of easy to access, really cool tools for making photorealistic games. But if you use those tools, you kind of like set your production a standard that you have to keep that standard for the entire production. And you don't have to kind of like ready or pre-made assets for every type of scenarios. Then you have to make those photorealistic assets yourself. You have to use photogrammetry, all kinds of like techniques that complicate the workflow of traditional kind of like game asset making. And when you're doing these large scale productions and trying to pursue the next gen experience, you suddenly, your game is going to end up costing a lot. And let's say for a AAA title, something like $10 million nowadays, nothing.
Yeah, they're much more than that, right?
Yeah, so there's a big stakes involved, and you have to kind of like, mediocre success is not enough for your studio. That's kind of like one thing that I'm really trying to nail with my early access, that if I manage to get a mediocre success, that will be a huge success for me, because I have tried to keep the production costs so low. And then the third kind of like aspect that I think this even affects indies is that game companies are quite divided when they hit their release, meaning it's quite rare that developers own the studio 100% themselves and share all the profits. There's all kinds of middlemans for those profits. So even though your game makes $1 million, there's so many percentages that the publisher might take 30%, Steam takes 30%, then there might be investors, and at the end of the day, you are dealing with quite a small profit margins. So you need that, again, a massive success in order to kind of like have that longevity for your studio. And when you combine all these three, kind of like we have this kind of like shift happening with the gamers, maybe not that big of a deal yet, but slowly getting there. Then we have this massive costs for these productions, and then all these studios are so kind of like divided to multiple investors and publishers, and there's so many kind of like middlemans there. So I think that's kind of like one reason why those layoffs are happening, but there's so many nuances to this topic, and also it's good to remember that most of the kind of like big guys, they are owned by even bigger studios. There's even though there's some layoff that might be that behind the scenes, that studio has nothing to do with that layoff decision. That might be some kind of like higher up decision that is not talked publicly, or there's so many kind of like things happening behind the scenes that the average consumer doesn't really might understand the decision. It just might look bad to that. Oh, again, once again, some studio laid off hundreds of people.
I see. Yeah, that's a very interesting take that you have just spoken about. A very interesting story as well, actually, with the kid. As a parent, I'm a bit worried about that. So it's my duty to, hopefully introduce gaming to him in a better way, not only through an iPad. But what I was thinking was not only are indies, I'm going to speak a little bit more specifically about indies now. Not only do indies have the problem, as you said, of sharing their revenue left and right with investors and the platforms on which they sell and all that stuff, but also sometimes there could be stories like what happened with, for example, Disco Elysium and their company. I don't know if you know the story.
I know some parts of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know the story in complete detail, but from what I understand through my, research is they got scammed. The game did very well, and they were kind of slowly pushed out of their own company, in part due to the lack of perhaps, business knowledge, and, on another part, perhaps due to them being a bit too naive. Whatever it is, I'm not, I haven't been there. I don't know the story firsthand, but that could also happen, right, with indies and whatnot. So it's definitely a really rough kind of environment to be in. But I think if you do get any sort of success, then as an indie developer, let's say, right, then you have a leeway to be motivated in order to proceed and to work and to continue doing what you're doing. So that's why I think indies are so important. And for the past, I don't know how long, I can't even recall, I have practically switched almost exclusively to indie games. And many of my friends have done so as well. Not because, the AAA industry is bad or whatever, but just, a lot of the games are just so repetitive and just more or less the same thing. Not all of them, obviously, but many. But when it comes to indies, you have these specific, directions, creative decisions that are being made with games that are just absolutely mind-blowing, jaw-dropping, interactive, interesting, and fun. And I mean, I don't want to list any examples because there's so many, but in any case, yeah, I see your point, and I see what factors can contribute to whatever is going on. And again, I hope to all the developers that got laid off for them to find a job elsewhere, and for them to continue working, and for their everything to be good, because I hate hearing when game developers just get laid off like that.
Actually, if I can add a few more points to that layoff
of
thing.
Course.
Few things to mention is also that when kind of like the COVID hit, there was kind of like lots of money, or at least I know personally that a lot of money was kind of like pushed towards the gaming, and it was kind of like the honeymoon season. There was lots of kind of like hiring, and everything was green. So it's one of the also nuances that is linked to these layoffs is that now that honeymoon season is over, and kind of like all the extra hiring, we have kind of like returned back to normal. So it's kind of like, even though it's a terrible thing, it's kind of like natural that the companies will correct themselves, because it's also a stupid thing that if you overspend constantly and not enough revenues coming in, so you're eventually going to have to lay off people. But not maybe the way that these companies have did so radically.
My goodness.
But the COVID thing was one, and also there's more competition now. There's, like you said, awesome games have come out, and whenever there's multiple awesome games at the same year, the revenue gets shared once again.
Right.
So
right.
I just wanted to add those, that the COVID thing and the competition is also factors for that.
Definitely. Definitely. COVID was a big deal for all sorts of industries and whatnot. Just to, change the topic now towards Road to Vostok, and kind of to dive into your mind a little bit here. When you create a video game, you know that it's going to take you a long time to make it, especially when you're creating it all by yourself. And throughout the process of its creation, you obviously have ideas coming in and out, and you're testing things and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And then eventually you start creating the final thing slowly but surely, with demos, with devlogs and whatnot. But are there moments sometimes that you're just developing your game, and then you have a random idea that popped in, and you're like, oh my goodness, how did I not think of this? This would be so amazing in this game. But now it's like a little too late to do it, or perhaps you're like, you know what, whatever, I'm going to squeeze it into the schedule just to get this mechanic in. Like, does that happen to you in terms of story, in terms of mechanics, or, you know, perhaps anything else, but within the scope of Road to Vostok?
For me personally, it's totally situation based, because if I'm at my home computer, I'm so busy every day because there's so much that's involved of running an India company than just making the game. You have accounting, you have trademarks, you have auditing, you have kind of like contractors, communication, payrolls, withhold taxes. So when there are not times that you are actually making the development, you are making those company stuff. But when I kind of like transition away from my home office and maybe go for a walk, then those ideas start to come in. And so basically I have this kind of like valve that I can control the flow of ideas. If I want more ideas, I go away from my home PC.
Interesting.
But it's also really dangerous because
exactly.
When you are trying to build a game that is going to take, let's say, 10,000 hours to make, you have so much tasks ahead of you and you want to stick with the original vision. So it's quite dangerous that you get because many developers, especially the ones that don't have experience under their belt, they are usually drawn to cool ideas and they get bored, because making games on a daily basis, that's going to need routines, that's going to need same kind of workflows over and over again. So each time when you want to break those routines, you came up with something cool and new. And suddenly, if you have hundreds of those new and cool ideas, your progression starts to get worse, because you are not implementing the original ideas, you are implementing the new ideas, and new ideas always introduce new bugs. So it's kind of like a cycle it's really good to have, and development should not be just boring routines. For example, I think nowadays I allow myself maybe once a month to try to do something kind of like off the normal development routine. Maybe I do something totally not Road to Vostok related, or I'm making some cool dev tool for myself or extend Godot engine some way. But I want to limit that I'm not constantly trying to figure out cool new stuff, because there's so much core work left.
Right. Yeah, that's very, I think it takes a lot of composure to be able to do that. And as you said, it's very nice how you said that you have a valve that you control, a valve of ideas. It's great that you can control it, because, I mean, I would imagine, I'm just thinking about myself, if I were to create a game, I'm going to have like new ideas every day and I'll never finish it. And I think that's, what some game devs go through. So what you're saying is you have an established schedule, established ideas, and you allow yourself to think and to improvise ever so often. But then when you feel that it's getting out of hand, you just close it all down, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. No, really, that's really awesome. That's a great, I think that's a big skill to have for, game development.
And definitely I cannot wait that I can showcase some of those ideas that I already have made 5 years ago, but I don't have yet. It's not the time to implement those. So currently what people are still seeing through this game is kind of like the core FPS functionality and core survival mechanics. But all those cool ideas that I have already planned that are coming to this game, I'm really waiting that I can showcase some of these. Then people are going to see that, I think we said something like this in the last interview also, that I'm not just building a survival game. There's more to this story, and I haven't shown anything about those yet.
That's awesome. I really like the way you intrigue everybody. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, I might be mistaken, I think those were the first lines in the intro of the podcast. I'm not making just a video game, or maybe the closing lines. It was just so awesome, and the way you absolutely portray your project. Awesome. Okay, yeah, that's really something to look forward to. And I hope, we're here, we're waiting, we're not going anywhere. I think the community that's following you is just growing bigger and bigger. So let's talk about now, the absolutely long-awaited public demo version 2. You put that out there, and I enjoyed it so much. I didn't enjoy it because you made it, or because, I have a certain connection to you and to your work. I really enjoyed it genuinely. And I want to tell you this genuinely. I knew that it was a demo. I knew there was a short snippet, what's to come. But it was really interesting because it kind of kept me motivated to play a bit more, because I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna kind of go to my base and make my base beautiful and put the gun there, and put some clothes here just in case I die, and then I have to find. It was just so good, and I really liked the way you handle the what would be like the scavenging mechanic, perhaps, that when you look around, everything is so randomized. It can be in so many different locations. I was so many times I was just surprised by where I found different items. But I can go on and on about how much I like the demo. I believe I played around 7 to 8 hours, and I want to play more when I'm back from traveling, obviously. But what I want to ask you about is, so how did the reception go for you? You have also given a certain email where people can email you certain feedback about bugs and whatnot. How did that go? How many emails did you receive? And just generally, how did you handle the whole situation?
I think in general, I'm really happy with kind of like the average playtime increased a lot from the first demo, and that's kind of obvious because there's more content. But even with the bare bones demo map, some people, I have seen multiple streams that lasted almost 10 hours of kind of like trying the demo. So even with that little content,
wow.
that provided somewhat enjoyable experiences for multiple hours. And for a demo, having multiple hours of playtime is really good thing, or a good sign, because if you have to kind of like imagine a bit, but if you have something like that with really immersive maps, with really good AI, with really kind of like good loot variety, and then that, even though the demo was called gameplay loop demo, I'm not that sure if that represents the game loop that well, but I'm pretty sure that I can develop that idea that kind of like the seed is there, and now with the early access, people hopefully are going to see that seed growing into much bigger thing, because I think the core functionality is there, but it just needs a lot of content, cool content, and kind of like replayability, because now there's not that much why you want to replay after that, let's say 8 hours. But that's what I'm currently making.
Well, speak for yourself. Okay, yeah, understood. Well, I mean, I think definitely, of course, replayability is a great factor. But for me, it definitely has, even the demo has a lot of replayability. I was speaking to a friend of mine, I don't remember when, like just after I played the demo, and I compared this demo to Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes, actually. Because if we're talking about, AAA titles and AAA demos, a part of me thinks that Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes is a better game in general than Metal Gear Solid 5, Phantom Pain. I've played the demo like countless times, and that just showcases, how great the game's going to be, and how much the developers have put their blood, sweat, and tears into the game. And I kind of compared it to Road to Vostok, and I think it's the same thing. I've enjoyed the demo and everybody enjoyed the demo so much that I think you're really on the right path. And with as you said, more features coming into it, I only think it's going to get better and better. So you mentioned early access. I'm going to keep that thought for now because I want to just finish speaking about the demo a little bit, but I want to speak about that next. Could you tell me, from all the feedback that you got and from, your personal kind of opinions after playing the demo, and creating the demo and seeing the reaction of others, what are some of the things that you really didn't like about the demo? And what are some of the things that you were like, that's spot on, it worked exactly as I planned? And perhaps, what are some things that you saw problems with and want to improve?
The things that I liked was that shelter idea, and kind of like providing the player the freedom to kind of like customize the environment. Even with that little placement mechanic, I've seen so crazy shelter builds from people with thousands of kind of like items so neatly placed together, and I think that's awesome, even though that introduces a lot of bugs because you give that freedom to the player. But when I have the chance to extend that placement, so because now there's, for example, crafting, you can do a bunch of new crafting stuff, and there's going to be shelter crafting also, so you can craft shelter related kind of like furniture, and you customize the
Awesome.
And when there's going to be multiple shelters, some of will be kind of like small bug out shelters, some is going to be large, some of going to be cozy cabins. So I think that single placement feature combined with you can kind of like save the current positions with each item, that works really well. There's not that much need to use the shelter with the current demo because you can experience kind of like you just run to the east and you can experience most of the maps that way. But once there's enough distance to the border zone, you are going to need those shelters eventually, and you want to store those. So I think the shelter ideology works well. The stuff that I didn't like is that one of the key kind of like phrases that this title need to kind of like pull off is this dangerous journey towards the Vostok, and having this kind of like big scary moment when you go across that border and you realize that this is it, if I die, it's it. But with the current demo, it's partly related to the kind of like environment detail and not enough maps. That distance to the border zone is too short. You can go that through just few maps and you don't experience the journey there. And the idea, even the word Road to Vostok comes from the idea is that there's multiple kind of like roads that you can take. You can kind of like choose a path from the north, which is going to have different kind of gameplay experiences. Then there's going to be multiple different crossing points with each different game mechanics. Some are going to be easier crossing points with night. Some are going to need platforming skills. Some are going to, you have to use smugglers to use, for example, the sea routes, and you have to kind of like, the core idea is going to be that you choose this journey path.
My goodness.
There. So that's, even though the current demo is labeled gameplay loop, it's not fully kind of like what I meant with this journey, dangerous journey ideology. But even the next public demo 2, version 2, that is not going to have that, even though there are going to be a few map expansions. But the early access version, I'm not going to release that until I have playtested with myself and with other kind of like closed groups that the dangerous journey idea is there, because that's the whole key with this game idea.
Understood. Well, first of all, again, I'm very excited. I love hearing all your ideas. And you know what's great is that I remember talking to you at the beginning, before the second demo came out. And I remember the feeling of like, oh my God, this is going to be great. This is going to be interesting. And then the demo comes out and I'm like, my goodness, this guy did it again. And it's fantastic. So I can't wait for that next, oh my God, this guy did it again. Be it version 2.2, be it the early access, and eventually be it, the full release. So absolutely excited about that. Let's quickly talk about, version 2.2. So from what I understand, it's going to be more or less the same in terms of what it is right now, the gameplay loop and everything. But you said there's going to be extensions to the maps. So how many maps are we talking about, if you know?
We are most likely talking about the exact same maps, but more detail and kind of like ways to get immersed. So more visual detail and stuff, and a bit layout changes. But the most important thing is that this next demo update, this is going to need to kind of like have a bit longer shelf life, because this demo will be the demo on Steam while I'm making the early access version.
Right.
So it needs to have more stuff to do to kind of like extend the shelf life, and that's why there's a bunch of new features. There's the task system with traders, there's crafting, there's armor system, there's caliber-based ammo types, there's dynamic ambient system, there's the new AI overhaul, and these map expansions. But a number of maps will probably stay the same. If I have time, I will try to fit one more shelter in, so people can try to kind of like have this two shelter ideology, where you have one closer to the border zone and one maybe that attic. But I'm not sure if I can have time for that. But yeah, that's the idea, that demo is going to be the kind of like main demo on Steam until I have that early access version ready.
Got it. Okay, got it. So you're going to expand on what you have right now. Well, I mean, with all the expansions that you're talking about, I think, it's if you had streams of 10 hours, now you can have streams of much, much more hours. And especially with, the AI overhaul, I got to say, I really like the fact that, first of all, the game has no hand holding at all, which is just absolutely amazing. But second of all, when I was playing, you really have to pay attention where you're going and you really have to listen, because the AI kind of blends into the environment, blends into the buildings. They're walking kind of slowly. So it's not like they're, in some games, the enemies are specifically highlighted in a certain color perhaps, or they make a certain noise. So they're there. Whereas here it's like they're just lurking. And I genuinely got, absolutely scared sometimes when I just all of a sudden they shot me, boom. I don't know where the hell the shot came from. I'm running for my life. I'm jumping, I'm sweating. And just these emotions already are costing, are representative of how, great the game is. And, that's just the whole enjoyment, right? The emotions from what you're playing. So great to hear that all these new stuff are coming. Do you know when, more or less? Version 2.2?
I think on my website it says Q2 this year, but there's few personal things that are going to, and few stuff behind the scenes that are probably going to affect the timeline. But this summer, let's just say that.
Gotcha.
When there's warm weathers in Finland, that's still when the demo comes out.
Got it. Okay. And the demo is going to include I think you said the starting kits, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
that's really cool. The
there.
Starting kit is just so awesome, I think.
And this new AI is, even though, thanks for the compliment with the current demo AI, but because the AI is one of kind of like make or break things with these single player games, because everything else falls apart if there's no unpredictability and kind of like replayability with the AI.
Right.
So with this AI overhaul, we have tested this on Patreon with few people, and there have been some positive responses, but I know even now that even that is not going to be enough. So it's going to need a second phase.
Oh my goodness.
Later this year, because that's really important. When there's no other players interacting and providing that replayability in a multiplayer fashion, the AI kind of has to feel that thing. But I know that it's totally doable. It's not about my developer skills, not about Godot engine. It's just about I have already those cool ideas for the AI, but I need time to implement those, and hopefully I have that time later this year, hopefully.
Gotcha.
So this is not going to be the final overhaul. This was called the AI overhaul phase 1. Phase 2 hopefully comes later this year.
Oh my God, awesome. That is great. That's good. I mean, I can't even potentially imagine what overhaul phase 2 is going to be like, but whenever it comes, it's going to come. So since you mentioned AI, we're just going to move the early access a little bit further, Antti, if you don't mind. So for the AI currently with the overhaul, so what you have showcased is, the enemies are going to now, they're going to carry backpacks, they're going to carry multiple weapons. Am I correct in understanding that if, like now, for example, with Overhaul 1, Phase 1, if an enemy sees you far away and the primary weapon is some close range weapon, they can just switch to a long range and try to snipe you from far away and stuff like that?
Yeah, in theory, they have all kinds of abilities now to do all kinds of use headlamps and night and that kind of stuff. But the main thing, I have few stuff deactivated for now, because first I really want to see how that kind of like behavior mixer works. That's basically a fancy word of saying randomize the behavior in the right moment and kind of like in a way that you don't know what the next AI move will be. So there's now kind of like initial set of features, behaviors. I call that the behavior pool. I think there's around 8 different behaviors. Previously, the demo that you played, the AI had 2 behaviors, Wonder and Combat. 2?
Oh my God.
So now there should be a lot more movement and unpredictable moments.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah, I first want to see how that behavior mixer work? Does it need
Right.
more kind of like intelligence, or does the current randomization idea just work, meaning it chooses between passive and aggressive behaviors?
Got it.
But once that is kind of like with the right values and it behaves somewhat unpredictable way and still somewhat logical way, then I will start adding or activating the other cool stuff on top of that.
Awesome. So when you say cool stuff, am I correct in understanding that it's what you were showcasing? Attack, hunt, cover, combat, ambush, these types of behaviors, or right? Is that what?
Yeah, those were part of that behavior pool, that it's kind of like the behavior mixer chooses
Gotcha.
between those behaviors. And I want to see how it kind of like how that mixing behavior works. Public demo 2 version 2 will have that AI overhaul, which introduced these new behaviors.
Got it. Oh, amazing. I can't wait. Because, yeah, I really can't wait, because already the AI was scaring me a little bit at some points. But I guess it's going to feel a bit more realistic and a bit more chaotic. So great. That's good to know about version 2.2. So if we may divert our attention to the early access. So obviously, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a ways away. And right now you're focusing on getting the demo version 2.2 out, as you mentioned. So it's on the shelf for much longer so that you can then concentrate on the release of the early access. So can you talk a little bit about the early access? What can we expect? And I mean, obviously, I think you will be showcasing some stuff in your devlogs and whatnot, but kind of what is your plan and overall vision for the early access? Because we're all interested to know that.
Yeah, that's kind of like really big topic that even I haven't fully kind of like explained maybe to my people who follow this project, because this entire early production for Road to Vostok was divided into 2 phases. Was the demo phase, which has now lasted 2 years. And this was kind of like when I announced the project and so on. And then there's the phase 2, which is the kind of like building the early access phase. And these 2 phases are going to be totally different in multiple ways. First of those is going to be kind of like how the studio is going to operate, because now I think I have been almost at least 90% of the stuff that has been made to the game is done by me. Some of the stuff that I want to provide in that early access version is going to need kind of like input from people, not just from me. For example, voice actors are going to play I cannot voice act. So I'm going
awesome.
to hire external help, and not just voice acting, meaning more kind of like extending the contractors, using few kind of like collaborations with few studios in not just studios, meaning companies in terms of marketing, and kind of like you are going to need a totally different kind of like workforce and kind of like ambition, and you have to kind of like switch the gears a lot more aggressive towards kind of like progression. And that's going to involve a lot of decision making, meaning one of those decisions is going to be, do I want to, for example, take some sponsors to kind of like have this extra resources of getting that kind of like next gear towards development, or do I want to still continue just by myself? There's multiple things that I need to decide when this phase 2 starts. But then in terms of content, that early access phase, I think, especially survival games, kind of like if you screw up the early access, then you are just another survival game, just another early access survival game. Especially survival games have really bad stigma for early access, so that needs to be mediocre success is not enough for kind of like content based early access. You have to kind of like really provide something unique. So I'm going to divide after this for next demo version 2, there's going to be called demo brands and commercial brands. Those are going to be totally different things, different visuals, different kind of like feature pools and decision making. And only work that I'm going to do for the demo brands is bug fixes, but no new features for that. So the commercial brands will get all the kind of like cool stuff from that point forward. In terms of maps, I think I have these on my website, but the early access version will have something around 10 maps and 3 shelters, 2 crossing points. There's going to be school, outpost, terminal, bridge, bunker. There's going to be 4 different traders, faction bosses, faction events, kind of like dedicated game time, different winter mode, all kinds of new animation stuff that AI overhaul phase 2, and then that how I'm going to plan that release is that I'm going to kind of like organize these release candidates that are going to be played with closed groups, and I have a way how I want to kind of like analyze how those groups interact with the release candidate, and I'm definitely not going to release until I'm happy how that test group plays that.
Right.
So there's lots more effort for playtesting and kind of like doing this professional way of kind of like using video recordings and all kinds of debugging tools and heat maps and seeing how kind of like the dangerous journey idea works.
Wow. Well, I have to say, for those people who are going to be playtesting your early access, very lucky people, those.
Yeah, it's going to be. I have actually quite a lot of experience organizing playtest stuff before, right. But you want to have really kind of like mixed bag of different people for that group, because you don't want people who really like you and your project. You want to have really hard critics as well. You kind of like have to try to get that kind of like medium of what the people from all different backgrounds think. So I will definitely at some point kind of like announce few stuff related to those playtest groups, but that's not right now. It needs to be somewhat kind of like low number, because you are really try to analyze those individuals, and there you have to analyze the video footage, and kind of like you don't want to deal with thousands of people. So those are going to be, you are talking about 2-digit number of people per group.
When we eventually get our hands on the early access and we will be able to play it and see it in its majesty, in its full majesty, how different do you think will that be from the final release? And how far away do you think will the early access be from the final release?
It's so hard to even think about the final, but
it might be in early access for years, right?
Even though there's kind of like bad reputation for these forever early access titles, but like mentioned, this is designed to be a career-long game for me. But it's not going to mean that the full version will take that entire career. It just means that I'm going to support and evolve that full release. But
got it.
It's really hard to say. Maybe it's definitely multiple years. It's not going to be 1 year from early access. But yeah.
Okay, understood. Time will tell. Understood. All right, that's really interesting. Thank you, Antti. If I may ask you a few questions about the locations, and more specifically, the in real life locations that you showcase in your posts and in your devlogs. So, what exactly is the border zone, and why is everything so abandoned in the border zone? It's like borderline creepy. The the videos that you are showcasing, great atmosphere for sure. And just one more little addition. I remember I saw in one of your videos where you're showcasing one of these abandoned locations, there was a chair tied to a tree with like, I think, skis underneath it or something. And that was like something from a horror movie. Like, what is that? Do you know what the hell is going on? Why are these places so abandoned? And, what are they?
In terms of like, if I first talk about what those places actually in real life are, then I can maybe talk a little about how those are linked to the game's lore. But all those places are first near where I lived when I was younger. I lived nearly 20 years near that border zone, and I knew all those locations that are close to it. And Finland has this kind of like military history with Russia, and during World War II there was all kinds of activities happening, and I think it kind of like left a certain level of kind of like military uniqueness and kind of like environments that don't really exist in many places around the world.
Yeah.
For example, one of those kind of like key features of that border zone is that, I don't know if you're familiar with this term called salpalinja.
Unfortunately, no.
Yeah, during World War II, Finland, for example, by horses and manpower, I don't remember the exact length, but they were kind of like how to stop the Soviet tanks. The decision was to kind of like build these really, those were called dragon tooth, those kind of like pointy picked rocks weighing thousands of tons. And that line consists of 3 kind of like rocks, those dragon teeth side by side, and that line continues hundreds of kilometers of those dragon teeth. So that line and the surrounding bunkers are really kind of like visually unique. If you ever visit Finland, I definitely would recommend going. Some of those border zones are prohibited. You don't want to go there as a civilian. Really? You get fined. Yeah, but that line is still, you can totally, there's museums and you can kind of like hike along with that. So there's really cool and unique stuff that I want to highlight in a form of a video game, because I haven't seen any video games that have those kind of environments. Even I don't have nothing that yet on those demos. That's something that I really look forward to. But then some of those places are also, because during those wars, when the kind of like men came home from the wars, people needed lots of homes because there were destruction and lots of kind of like cities torn down. So there were kind of like the government started building these kind of like, when the type of houses that you see in Chernobyl, that exclusion zone, that kind of houses exist in Finland also, and those were building after the wars. And when those houses were built, the kind of like design for making that type of houses was quite bad, so they become let's just say the air quality came quite bad with those. And then over the time, when you have bad houses, those get abandoned. So naturally you have lots of abandoned places and houses that have kind of like post-apocalyptic vibe in that area.
Right.
So that's kind of like the why there's the kind of like premise comes from that.
Awesome. And what's great is that all the assets or the textures that you take from the assets, come from real life. If I'm understanding correctly, from like prop hunting in real life, all these different items and whatnot. That is so awesome. I remember in one of the videos you kind of go into like this. I don't know whether it's an attic or a tunnel or a bunker or whatever, but it's like super dark. You have your flashlight on, and then you just abruptly stop the video, and we don't know what was in that bunker. I don't know how you do that. I'd be scared to be there. Wow, but that's awesome. It's very interesting that this, part of history kind of still remains to be discovered by whoever decides to go there. Wow, that's crazy. And just to expand a little bit on the lore, all right? So I think me and probably many others who are following the game, I wouldn't say confused, but I would say probably excited and a bit bewildered as to what's going on. And what I am talking about is, and again, obviously, if you can answer, please do. If you cannot, no worries whatsoever. So we've seen a few actually, like live action shots that you have done. One specifically where we see the Bandit's lore. Now, what's interesting is when there's animated scenes going on, everyone's quiet, so they don't really speak. There's no conversation. And then always at the end, there's a certain static scene. And that static scene has a lot of conversation and a lot of information that is flowing. So it's a great juxtaposition that you're creating in these videos. My question is, could you expand a bit on the Bandit lore? Because they sort of run away in a scared manner when they hear the helicopter, right? So I assume that the people in the helicopter are not related to the bandits. And in another video, there's an interview with a bandit where they kind of blame the government for what's happening, certain signals or certain, I don't remember exactly what he said, but I think like certain buildings or signals or whatever that the government has done. If at all you can expand a little bit on what's going on, that would be great. If not, no problem.
Yeah. In the video, he was talking about structures.
Structures. Yes.
Te peitätte kasvonne. Miksi te piilotutte naamioiden taakse?
Ehkä tärkeämpi kysymys on, miksi te piilotatte teidän valheiden taakse. Jokainen järkevä ihminen kyllä tietää, mihin tämä johtaa. Me ollaan nähty ne rakennelmat, mitä ne aiheuttaa. Kukaan ei hallitse tilannetta, ei länsi, eikä itä. Kai ymmärrätte, että jos te ampuu ne alas, se johtaa tilanteeseen, mistä ei ole enää ehkä paluuta. Molemmilla puolella on tarpeeksi aseita tulla toinen, ja tämä koko kuva muuttuu hetkessä todelliseksi. Se ajatuksen pitäisi jättää pelkoa, ei meidän.
That's kind of like the big word, structures.
Yes.
But yeah, the Bandit lore, maybe first I have to say that kind of like the how I'm presenting those videos is kind of like tied to the production budget, because I don't have to have the capabilities to produce really high quality live action short films. So I chose
they're
this
awesome,
route of kind of like doing a quite small bit of better high quality video first, and then having this kind of like lost found footage style VHS tapes that are also going to be found in the game, and you can watch those within the game TV.
Right.
But yeah, the Bandit lore is the most easy to understand, because they are the kind of like the anarchists that left in that area, and when there's no law enforcement there, they are taking the law into their own hands, and they are kind of like the villains of the area. So those are the most easy to understand group. And why the bandits are afraid to helicopter, basically I'm not sure if you are familiar how Stalker works, but in Stalker you have this kind of like multiple factions that can roam around the game world freely. In Road to Vostok I'm planning to have similar kind of experience where there's kind of like dynamic roaming simulation. Also the bandits are the ones who want to go to Vostok, and there's going to be one faction that kind of like is neutral. I have not yet talked about this, but one faction is not going to be the bad guys, but you can for example go with those guys and use those as your help to kind of like cross the border. But yeah,
this is oh my god, that's so good.
But the bandits, why they are afraid of the helicopter, basically the helicopter is kind of like operated by those border guards, so they are kind of like, they have a link to that. Each time where they hear the helicopter, they know that, okay, those are the guard stuff.
Oh my god. Okay, and in all of this, again, I'm going to repeat myself. If you can answer, please do. If you can't, it's okay. What are the structures?
Yeah, I think I have one ace in my sleeve, because I don't have that multiplayer, but I want. Hopefully now the lore can be totally confusing, because there's only been that first video that even is slightly linked to what is going to happen. So there's going to be this mysterious event in the border zone, and all the chaos erupts from that. But I think that will be really cool as a developer to watch, because this is public information. I have said this multiple times, that this lore cannot be solved by one person. It's going to need a kind of like community effort, because it will involve so many skill sets from kind of like different industries, military type skill set. Then you're going to need kind of like maybe some computer science skill set, and maybe some radio amateur skill set, and you have to kind of like link so many pieces together. So it will include, I don't know if you have watched kind of like where people are trying to find these Easter eggs in Battlefield games and so on.
Oh yeah, for sure. Many times, yes.
Yeah, so this is going to need something similar in a large scale if people really want to understand the whole kind of like premise. But the early access version will definitely have more clues, and you have kind of like, there's some task items and lore items, and there's going to be one trader called Grandma, which is kind of like the oracle and the wise elder in the border zone. So she will know a lot about things, but you have to kind of like pursue to get that information from her.
Interesting. Grandma. Okay. Oh my god. I love our conversations, Antti. Really awesome. Okay, so Grandma, that's amazing. Wow. All right, so no more pushing on the structures. We're going to figure all that out ourselves. I just remembered actually one other example for, a great example for a community effort to solving a puzzle. I don't know if you've played that game. It's called PT. It's right? Okay, by Hideo before he while he was still at Konami, and that was the first time that I kind of was open to this idea. I'm like, wow, like everybody's kind of working together to solve this riddle. I was so involved. I didn't solve anything, obviously, but I was trying to figure it out and trying to, at least be in the community of people that is solving it. And it was awesome. It was absolutely awesome. And if you're talking about something like that, I'm all for it. And that's great. It's absolutely interesting.
Yeah, and I can also one thing, because I think I have said this in a few different places. So why it also needs a community effort is that because these maps are based in real locations, there's real similar houses that are already existent in the demos. So it's kind of like natural that some of the clues about the lore you need to find those in Finland in some of those map locations. So you're kind of like, if you are not living in Finland, you kind of like need somebody who is in Finland.
Wow. Antti.
You are not kind of like excluded from the lore, but there's some small things that you are going to need to find from Finland.
Well, thankfully, I got to tell you, one of my oldest, not one, but the oldest friend that I have, and one of my bestest friends, is from Finland. This is going to be an adventure for him. He's going to help me out for sure.
And I can promise that he won't know where to look before somebody figures out kind of like the first clue about even that location base. But mentioned, Finland has that really unique that those bunkers that I mentioned, those are totally open. Everybody can go into those bunkers, and there's hundreds of those. So each bunker has unique numbers, and I have never seen a video game that I think really cool things that, for example, Tarkov does. They have kind of like have these kind of like messages in bottles and kind of like buried somewhere, and people have tried to get those. But I have never seen a video game that truly kind of like utilizes the real locations in a way that you kind of like have to scavenge the locations as you would in a game.
My God. It's not a treasure hunt. It's a treasure hunt on steroids. This is. Wow. This is very exciting news. Very, very exciting news. And you know what's going to be interesting to see? Whenever, the game comes out, full release and whatnot, it's going to be interesting to see how much more tourism is going to be in Finland just for the sake of answering a couple of your of the riddles. I'm pretty sure a lot of the gaming community will try to go there and visit for sure. Maybe I'll go. I don't know.
And maybe also it's quite logical that when I made those devlog videos, those have kind of like showed some IRL clips also. Mm-hmm, so there's already lots of kind of like why Antti maybe showed that location in those devlogs.
Okay. Well, you know what, Antti? I'm going to take into my team GeoGuessr, okay? I'm going to call GeoGuessr. I'm going to take him into my team. I'm going to shotgun him so nobody can take him. Wow. That's awesome, Antti. I'm really excited, for the whole project, for everything that you're saying. It's like for me, when I'm speaking to you about this game, it's truly like being a child again, back in the era of like the Windows 98, PS1, PS2 era, back when gaming was like really, like mysterious and interesting. So, thank you for bringing those emotions back, not only to me, but I'm pretty sure to many others. And hopefully we're going to wait patiently until the day. But wow, very, very exciting. And I think it's also very ambitious from you. And definitely, take your time, and I'm wishing you, all the very best, because I want it to be the best thing possible from your end. So take all the time that you need. I'm trying to think of what's going to be interesting to speak about next, but I don't think that any other question is going to be as interesting as what we have talked about, right now. But I have to mention, the music in this game. I don't believe we spoke about the music last time, but I really want to talk about it now because God, oh God, is it just absolutely on point and absolutely great. It really brings out the eerie vibe, the atmosphere, and just absolutely great choice. Could you talk about, how that came to be? How did you speak to the composer? How did you tell the composer, what you wanted, and how did they deliver it? And just like, how did the whole soundtrack develop?
Music is one of those things that is really hard to kind of like tell the contractor what you want, because you cannot really, you can give maybe some references or examples, but it's quite, I think it's sometimes a bit luck that you happen to come across a composer that's really kind of like understand what you want, but still there's some luck that it kind of like the end result from that track is good. I have had somewhat of an input of some of those tracks, and sometimes I've just kind of like go for it, do something that you might see that could fit for this game. I'm really excited also because there have been multiple tracks that are, for example, Finland has this kind of like really cool kind of like retro music history also. We have all kinds of weird instrument and folklore and stuff. So that grammar, for example, now there have been in the game, there's kind of like old radios and old TVs and stuff. And one of the kind of like that I also like is kind of like vinyls and these old kind of like recording devices and so on. So that grammar will have one kind of like vinyl player, and the player, for example, there have been some tracks that I've not yet shared. Those are purely for kind of like the gameplay purposes, and there's going to be tasks that are also music related that you have to provide the grammar certain
awesome
stuff, and the music will play. I really want to emphasize that Finnish culture thing in some of those tracks. The OST tracks are more kind of like that lore mystery, but I really want to also have that kind of like fun, casual type Finnish music. But I definitely want to. That's one of kind of like the why I don't want to work with AI. For example, AI can make pretty wild things with music even nowadays. You can just type the words and what kind of like reference, and it will produce that kind of track. So I really want to work with composers and pay money for those contractors, because I really like the process of trying to kind of like iterate and having this kind of like tailored handmade tracks.
Right, exactly, to find exactly what fits. I would assume that's such an amazing and creative process to see the creation, to see how everything fits. I can only imagine how great that must be. I can only relate it to video work. Whenever I create like all these intros, when I find a song that in my head fits the intro, it's like such a satisfying thing. But I can only imagine how it's probably tenfold more satisfying to do that on a video game with absolutely custom made music. Absolutely wonderful to know. Talk to me about the Finnish folklore music real quick. Are you talking about custom made music, Finnish music, or already national music or tunes that exist and you can input them into the game?
I would say it's custom made, but it really much mimics the real deal. There is. So I think I would maybe even have the copyright to use, because some of those tracks are so old that those are kind of like expired from copyright, but I still want to kind of like make that this is in a Road to Vostok custom track for this game. But for example, Finnish people are going to notice that, this is that one track, but a bit more customized.
So awesome. And I remember, I don't remember where you wrote it, but I remember reading that you enjoyed DayZ because it had the Cyrillic alphabet. And because you didn't understand anything, that that involved you kind of, figuring it out and looking at, online and trying to figure out what it says. And you're kind of doing the same thing to us now for those who don't speak Finnish.
Yeah.
That we're going to be,
Hopefully later this year I can already, because I have already made some preparations for that, but this demo phase has been so busy, so all this cool innovation stuff has sometimes left behind. But for example, there's going to be this Vostok radio, which is going to be this in-game radio, all kinds of advertisement and kind of like game weather and stuff, and that will be synced to real internet radio, which is also going to be kind of like So there's, even though there's not multiplayer, there's going to be features that are kind of like almost like there's an internet connection. So there's going to be kind of like real radio station that broadcast the same stuff that the game does.
My God, that is so awesome, Antti. Really, really great ideas. You know, could you be the Hideo Kojima of indie game development? Probably so. After this game is complete.
I don't know. I just really enjoy making these type of things, and I'm totally aware what the game is now and what it isn't. There's, it's, for example, it's really hard to take any compliments and kind of like see the positives now, because you are so far away from that vision that you had 10 years ago when you decide that someday I want to make this game. This is so early. I'm so fortunate that people have already kind of like, there's so many people that have kind of like this idea has seemed compelling to them and they trust me as a developer, and I also think that I'm the right guy to get this towards the finish line. But there's so much stuff. I think one could, I don't think if I'm the right guest for that, but whenever you have a developer that really commits to something and tries to kind of like make this career-long endeavor, it requires so much work. It's ridiculous amount of work. It's so much sacrifices. So sometimes some podcast would be great if somebody really like follows the developer, or some artist, or everybody who has kind of like creative endeavor that they are truly passionate in, and follows him or her like a few days and see what it's like to kind of like what kind of stuff is needed to make that happen. And there's so many sacrifices already that I have had done, and I know that I will have to do much more, and especially this early access phase is going to need pretty difficult decisions in some cases, because you really have to kind of like deliver. There's no kind of like there's no option of failing in this early access phase, because that will ruin the entire reputation for the game. So there's so much work to do, but I'm really happy about the progress. I'm excited that this early access phase begins, but it's totally different ball game to develop a commercial product than a free demo. If only I could develop a game, that would be wonderful. But there's so much other stuff involved of trying to kind of like sustain an indie game studio. There's so many, some tasks are so annoying, some are really fun. There's so much that you need to collaborate and communicate and make sure that you have all the legal stuff, you don't screw those up, and there's so much stuff other than the game development. So I think many players don't really understand how hard video game development is, also how hard it is to run a game studio, because there's no revenue coming in at the kind of like first few years. You have to kind of play all kinds of small games as an entrepreneur to kind of like figure out how you can sustain a business and still gain independence, or at least kind of like decision freedom, so you own your company more than 50% and so on.
My goodness. Yeah, I can totally understand that, because I've been not running a gaming company, sorry, but I had experience in running a company, and boy, oh boy, is it a hard thing. And I can only imagine doing it all by yourself. And I think it would only serve justice to you and to what you're doing for there to be, a showcase of, as you said, the other side of the spectrum when it comes to game development, and especially solo game development. And I think that would definitely be not only interesting, but also very informative for everybody. So that's a wonderful idea, and something that perhaps I can take you on, and we can discuss that just a little bit later. Antti, with all that said, thank you so very much for this wonderful conversation, sort of a year in review. Every time we speak, I get absolutely amazed and interested in this game even more. The stuff that we talked about today, I mean, goodness, I don't even know. I'm thinking now of the intro, and there's so much stuff that, the intro has to be like 5 minutes long just for this conversation. So thank you for that. Again, thank you for being so open. And, on behalf of the whole community and myself wishing you all the best, a lot of luck. Take your time and produce that dream game that you always wanted to. We're going to be here to play it. So thank you very much, Antti.
Thank you.